Hey everyone, Aaron here, and today I wanted to go through and explain to you the roles that people have in the studio. When you're making a record, you've got a bunch of different people who are working on it. Yeah, I'm going to give you a summary of how it's usually all laid out. Now, disclaimer, nowadays, one person occupies like a lot of these roles. And more nowadays when album budgets are going down and down and down. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Even though maybe one person's doing a lot of these roles nowadays, this is still a good vocabulary to know about if you're looking to make records or whatever. So first of all, the producer. The producer is the person who is basically in charge of the album. Along with the artist, they are responsible for what gets made. That's why being a producer is like a big deal. Whether they actually do the work or not, they assemble the team to work on the record. When I was in Nashville, I worked for a producer, like a CCM type of producer, did a lot of different things. He was a really great example of like a classic producer, really good at assembling people. He was like, oh, I know who will be good for that background vocal. I know who will be good for this part. I know who will be good for this part. He knew everybody. He was always on his computer and on his phone calling people and coordinating and managing. A producer is an album manager, but also in a creative sense, the producer is responsible for sort of getting the artist's dream to life and also translating that into some sort of commercially viable like product, depending on what kind of thing you're working on. So it's a lot of responsibility on the producer's shoulders to bring something from basically, someone just playing with an acoustic guitar to a fully finished album. And a producer can see that potential in someone. So they have to have a degree of, obviously, musical taste. Also, it's very relational. Being a producer is extremely relational. I sometimes think of producers like pastors. They're like, or counselors. They kind of take people under their wing and they help them to blossom. They help them to develop. They, speak good words to them. They know how to talk to an artist. They know how to get the best out of an artist. I've learned the art of knowing how to say the right thing and when to not talk and what to say. That used to be very awkward when I first started making records and I was producing. I was like, okay, this person is not playing this part right. What do I do? That used to be very awkward for me. It's not awkward now because I know I have a set of tools to, sort of work that out. So maybe it's like, maybe that's not the part we're going to play. Maybe we're going to get somebody else to play it. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, all of that stuff. As a producer, you need to help the artist know that you're on their side. You are there to help them. You believe in them. You like what they're doing, and you want it to be great. And you're like their translator for making their dreams reality. Again, like I said, it's a lot of pressure. I'm a producer myself. That's probably the thing I like doing the most when I'm making records because it's extremely rewarding to go from someone just playing a song to like a finished album at the end and see them sort of, believe in themselves more than they did at the beginning. And just to be a part of that, to be a part of making someone's dream a reality is amazing. Whether or not you get paid a lot for it, it's always rewarding. Next one, an engineer. Now, an engineer is basically the technical mastermind of an album. So when you go into a recording studio, the engineer is the person usually choosing the microphones, choosing the pieces of outboard gear, running the digital audio workstation or the multi-track Pro Tools or whatever, running the console. The engineer is sort of like the technical boss of the project. So the engineer has a very high level of technical expertise, and they are basically responsible for the sonic result of the album. The sound of the album is a result of the engineer. The producer and the engineer typically work very close hand in hand together. And a lot of times you get the same producer and the same engineer working together on lots of projects, because that's a relationship, almost like a band relationship, that you can't just get anyone to, as a producer and then just any old engineer. You have to have a certain amount of chemistry and even like history there. That's why a lot of times it is the same person. The producer is the engineer. So that's one less line of communication. If I'm producing and I'm engineering, I don't have to tell someone else, hey, go get this sound. I just know the sound that I want to get, and then I just go get it. So that's how it works a lot of the time too. But still today, you will see separate producers and engineers. Again, the engineer is kind of the technical genius, and the producer is maybe the creative genius and the relational genius. A lot of geniuses there, but that's basically an engineer. Next one, a studio musician. This is a person who is hired to come in and play on a record. When I worked in Nashville, there were lots of studio musicians, and their level of ability, talent, technical ability, and also their gear, still to this day, that is the highest level of gear and playing and freakazoid ability that I have ever seen. These people had the ability to come together and play on a song they had maybe heard one time, like they'd been playing together for 20 years. Not only did they play the song perfect, the first time through, but they played it with spontaneity and inspiration, and it wasn't, all the cliches that you hear about, it's all going to be sterile and it's all, whatever. That is not what I experienced at all when I was in Nashville. These session musicians are just incredible. They can improvise, they can adapt. They've played on so many different things. They know exactly, where each other are going, and they know if you want to make it messier, they can make it messier. If you want to make it dirtier, they can make it dirtier or cleaner. They have the gear and the expertise and the talent and the experience to just basically do whatever you want. So a studio musician is someone like a chameleon who can come in and kind of play on a variety of styles, has top shelf gear. I mean, your gear has to be amazing if you are a studio musician, especially in a big music city like Nashville or LA or New York. So that's a studio musician, someone who comes in and plays and serves the vision of the artist and the producer. All right, next, assistant engineer. This is someone who is assisting the engineer. A lot of times this is the person who is plugging in microphones. The engineer will give them a sheet with, here's the drum mics, plug all these in to these inputs, and then do this on the patch bay. And if something's not working, the assistant engineer will work with the engineer to sort of fix it if a technical thing isn't working. Or if a mic needs to be switched out, the engineer will tell the assistant engineer, hey, let's go switch out that kick drum mic. I want this one instead. Assistant engineer will run out there, grab the other mic and switch it, as quick as possible and come back in. So they're there to just assist the engineer. On down the line, you have interns as well. A lot of times when you're in the studio, you got an intern in there. An intern, I started out as an intern when I first started working in Nashville. An intern basically does anything. Anything somebody wants them to do, that's what you do. So it's picking up lunch for people, it's printing out chord charts, it's cleaning up, vacuuming. You're there before anyone else is, and you're there after everyone else leaves. You're kind of paying your dues, as an intern, just getting experience in the studio. You get to be a fly on the wall. Again, you don't really have an opinion into the project. You're there to learn. You're there to serve and get experience just in a real recording studio. Sometimes an intern will end up being kind of an assistant engineer, or if the engineer needs a break and there's no assistant, the intern will step in and run Pro Tools if you know how to run Pro Tools as an intern. Typically, interns are not paid, but sometimes they are. You're getting paid in the experience that you're getting, and it really is worth it. Still today, I would say it is worth, if you can get an internship at a big studio where they've got a schedule and they got projects coming in, I would say do that. If you want to learn, you will glean a lot just living in an actual studio and being there and watching records get made. And I loved it. Honestly, I loved my time as an intern, and that led to a lot of assisting and then a lot of engineering. Just a few more here. We've got an A&R rep. Sometimes when you're in the studio, someone from the label will come. It's typically the person at the label who's responsible for kind of the relationship with the artist. They kind of like check in a lot of times. My experience in the studio, it totally depends on who your A&R person is. If they're really chill, maybe it's cool. Maybe they come and they buy people drinks and, you show them the record and it's fun or whatever. But a lot of times there's a lot of pressure when an A&R person comes into the studio because basically you're kind of like performing for them a little bit. You want to kind of prove to them that the record's going really good. So you typically have to kind of like take a break from what you're doing and like, okay, let's get a rough mix here for the label guys coming in. We're gonna get a little rough mix here, and you're looking at them out of the corner of your eye and whatever. It can also really be a nightmare when they start to like suggest things, and that has happened like on multiple occasions when a label person comes in and they're like, oh, I think it should be more like this or whatever, because sometimes they're creative people, but they're thinking very commercially. They're like, oh, this isn't going to sell, and whatever. Hopefully, if you're dealing with a label person, maybe you're an artist or a producer or whatever, hopefully you get a really chill one who's just there to have a good time and buy the band like some drinks and give them some high fives and just be there for 5 minutes and then leave. But sometimes they're there for longer and it's like a nightmare. So, hey, that's my limited experience with like label people in the studio. But if you're a label person, or whatever, sorry, just go easy on the artists. If you're making a car, it's not going to look like a car till maybe the very end. And at some point it might look like kind of a disaster. And it's like, is that even going to work? I don't even know if that's going to work. And if you come in and kind of tweak it at a point where it's not really ready to be tweaked, problems can arise. So just be aware of that. Whoever you are, be aware of that relationship between producer, artist, label person. It can get tense. All right, next is the mix engineer. This is the person who mixes the album. So you come into the studio, you record everything. You record maybe some overdubs later. You get some vocals going. It's all finished, like being recorded. After that, it goes to a mixer. And this person is the person who balances all of the levels of all of the different instruments, does panning, puts effects on it, does a lot of equalization, does a whole bunch of things. It's an art unto itself, mixing an album. Typically, these people kind of work alone. They're, a bigger mix person will also maybe have an assistant who kind of sets up the sessions for them. And I have to say, this is a very important job. A mix person can really make or break the sound of an album. You got to get the right person on it. You got to get somebody you trust. I would venture to say that you can get away with like okay engineering, like decent engineering, if you have a really good mix person. But I would not say the converse. If you have a great engineer and like a subpar mix person, I would be like really nervous about how that project is going to turn out. I need to trust, if I'm a producer and I'm giving it to somebody else to mix, or I'm an artist, I need to really trust that person, because you can change the whole vibe of how a thing sounds just with how you mix it. Whether you're going for a very organic, like natural sounding thing, or a hyper produced, shiny pop thing, or a blistering like rock thing, the mixer really has to know what the producer is thinking. So the producer and the artist should really work close with the mix person, or at least the producer should. The producer should know, like, oh, I know who could mix this and make it sound great. As a producer, if I'm giving it to someone else to mix, I will give a rough mix. Like, here's kind of how it should sound. That gives the mixer a good idea of kind of where to go, and then they can just kind of do their thing based on that. But once it's mixed, that's basically how the album is going to sound. And then the last part is the mastering engineer. So the mastering engineer will take the mix. So the mixer takes, all of the 100 tracks or whatever and mixes them down to just a stereo left-right mix. And then the mastering person gets that mix, that left and right, and they will do kind of a final tweak on it. Typically, they'll do some leveling. They will do a little bit of EQ. And a mastering person typically has like really, really good ears and amazing, amazing speakers and an amazing room. So it's kind of like the last line of defense before it just goes into the public world. You're giving it to the mastering engineer because they will listen to the final mix and they'll go, ooh, yeah, this is a little harsh at 2 kilohertz or whatever compared to everything else that's out there. There's some creativity to mastering, but a lot of it is more on the technical side. They are looking at overall levels. Is your album as loud as everyone else's, or is it too loud, compared to other people's? How are the dynamics? How's the low end? How's the high end? And then also they do kind of spacing in between songs. They're doing a final kind of sequence of the album, and then they will print like a final mastered version. So that's it. That's basically all of the people who make an album happen. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of these roles are combined, especially nowadays. You need to have someone who can be a producer and an engineer and a mix engineer and a mastering engineer. I get asked to do that a lot. Hey, can you engineer this? And then can you also mix it? And then can you also master it? And to be honest, I've gotten a lot of work because I can do a good job or a passable job of all of those things. So it's good to kind of learn those skills, whether you want to specialize in that long term or not. It's good to be able to do that so that if someone asks you like, hey, can you also master this? You're not like, no, I can't. You're like, yeah, sure, I can master it. Yep. And that's what people want nowadays. Hey, can you just do everything or whatever? But also it's good to know what things to pass off, when you're working. And it's also good to understand what these roles are, to know what you want to go and study and specialize in. Because maybe, you're going to go learn about mastering and that totally lights you up and you love the idea of like you working in like a perfect acoustic environment and getting $50,000 speakers and like being that final check before it goes out into public. Maybe that's what you love. Or maybe you love the idea of being a producer, working with an artist to help their dreams like come to life. Or maybe for you, you're like, you know what? I'm not a producer, but I want to be an engineer. I want to like dive into the technical aspect of things. I want to learn all about microphone technique and how to get certain sounds. I want to learn about the history of recording. I want to learn about how different rooms sound and how I can get different spatial interesting things. I want to learn about plugins and recording and all that technical stuff. If that lights you up, dive into that. Typically, the bigger an album is, like the bigger budget it has, the more these roles will be spread out. The more you have like a specialist in this area, producer, engineer, mix engineer, mastering engineer, intern, assistant engineer, whatever. But the whole world of recording is just a joy to be a part of. I know it can be intimidating, so hopefully that was helpful, just a few of those definitions. Let me know if you have any questions about studio roles or working in the studio down in the comments below. That's going to be it from me today, and we'll see you all next time.